there, Ramblers, and welcome back to Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro, computing, gaming, and technology. There we go, that's the intro. I'm Reese from Control-Alt-Reese, and I hope you're all doing well out there. Welcome to another weekend, indeed. So, as you can probably see, the studio is all back together now. It is no longer in disarray as it was in last week's Ramble, and I will talk about that a bit later on in this Ramble, and a bit about the results of the construction work that I'd been doing. Of course, it had quite a big detrimental effect on my video production schedule, so it's nice to have all of that done, and the studio is looking rather nice and clean and tidy at the moment as well, and it's actually turned out to be quite successful, my little project. So I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing a bit about that later on. But for now, let's dive straight into my first story for this week. And this comes from Gravitone, who is a regular over on my Discord server. So thank you ever so much for submitting this story. Now, I must admit, I had a very quick glance at this, and I kind of completely got the wrong end of the stick as to what it was all about. And I'm glad that I took the time to dig into it a bit more, because it's quite interesting. In fact, no, scratch that. It's very interesting indeed. So this is over on hackaday.com. Of course, a beloved website in the world of hardware and software hacking and modding, I guess. They've been going for quite a long time now, haven't they? I remember reading Hackaday way back when I was at university, and I wonder when they started. Anyway, let's not get derailed this early on in proceedings. This is a story about bringing back the BIOS. So the headline here is Bring Back the BIOS to UEFI Systems, that is. And this article was written by Jenny List. Does that sound like a made-up name to you? It's a good name, Jenny List. I like that. I thought that this was just something that, just a fun little thing that you could install that would kind of display when you first boot up your computer and kind of, make it look like it had a good old-fashioned BIOS. But it turns out there's a whole lot more to this than that. So, as the story says here, at the dawn of the PC, IBM provided the basic input-output system. It took care of bringing the machine up and exposed a series of software hooks for the hardware. Over the years, the BIOS and its updated descendants served us well. But as we entered a 64-bit world, its limitations began to show. The replacement was the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, or UEFI, and the chances are you're viewing this on a machine which uses it in some capacity. But what if you only have UEFI and need BIOS to run a piece of older software? Never fear, because here's CSM Wrap, which brings it back just for you. Under the hood, it's a wrapper for the cBIOS compatibility support module, doing the work of setting up the memory mapping such that it will load and ensuring that other services, such as the VGA BIOS, are loaded. As it stands, it can boot FreeDOS and some older Windows versions under UEFI in QEMU, and it's claimed also run on real hardware. We don't often need to run DOS on our 2025 machine, but it's neat to know that we can. Meanwhile, if the BIOS interests you, know that there's also an open source BIOS for the earliest of PCs. And that just links to another related story, so I'm not quite sure why I read that, because that's not really relevant. But anyway, yes, so what is going on here? This is a project called CSM Wrap. So if we click through to the GitHub repository for this, developed by somebody known as FlyGoat. Also a great name. We're only a couple of minutes in and we've got a couple of great names already. CSM Wrap is a cool little hack that brings back the good old PC BIOS on those fancy pants UEFI only systems. It utilises the CSM compatibility support module and Visa BIOS from the cBIOS project to emulate a legacy BIOS environment. And I'm going to click through to cBIOS and just explain what that is as well, just so we've got a good picture of what this is all about. So cBIOS is an open source implementation of a 16-bit x86 BIOS. cBIOS can run in an emulator, or it can run natively on x86 hardware with the use of Coreboot, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's an open source firmware that you can install on. I think it's quite popular on some models of ThinkPad, isn't it, Coreboot? Probably something I need to look into at some point. But it is also the default BIOS for QEMU and KVM, which I'm sure you've heard of. Of course, virtualization environments. The Coreboot cBIOS page has information on using cBIOS in Coreboot. Please see releases page for information on recent releases, yada, yada, yada. So cBIOS is an open source BIOS, essentially, which of course was the basic input-output system that used to initialize those old PCs back in the day. And what someone has done, what FlyGoat has done, has created a wrapper for this, so you can actually boot this natively on your modern-day PC under UEFI, the Unified Firmware, whatever it stands for. I have no interest in this modern stuff. So, so right now, as it stands, CSM Wrap can boot FreeDOS, Windows XP, and Windows 7 in QEMU, both Q35 and Pix4 machines, and it can run on some real hardware too. I think I need to have a play with this. I have got some kind of more modern machines that might be quite fun to have a play with this and maybe get XP or something running natively, or perhaps even something a bit older. But it's actually doing a fair bit under the hood here. So implementation details, CSM Wrap works by unlocking the legacy BIOS memory region, which of course I guess is locked out on these modern systems. It's loading the CBIOS CSM module into memory, configuring memory mapping for legacy applications, setting up VGA BIOS with information from the EFI GOB. It's building an E820 memory map based on the EFI memory map, providing essential compatibility tables for ACPI and SM BIOS, initializing the CSM module and legacy services, and transferring control to the legacy boot process. So, yeah, I guess it's like running an emulator or like a virtual, but not really. Kind of at a very low level on real hardware. So it's not. No, it's just a wrapper that kind of bootstraps. I need to get my head around how this actually works. I don't know much about how UEFI actually works, to be honest. But yeah, so there's just a wrapper that you just drop into your EFI partition and just use it as your bootloader, as you would with any other modern day operating system, and boot from it. And that's it. There's quite a few things that you do need to tweak in your on your modern PC to allow this to kind of work to its full capacity. So you need to disable secure boot, of course, and also memory mappings above 4 gig decoding. So you've got stuff like your GPU's VRAM BAR, which I think is an issue I ran into when I was trying to run that external GPU on that Mac Mini quite a while ago. This is kind of giving me a bit of PTSD, I must say. You have to kind of remap those because, of course, legacy BIOS doesn't have it. It's 32-bit, so it doesn't have access to anything above 4 gigabytes, yada, yada, yada. But if you've got the option to fix that mapping, you can do that. There's also some other things that I must confess I don't fully understand, but also an issue with Windows XP and Windows 7's video mode setting logic, which apparently can cause some issues with this. And there is a fix for that, which is to inject the GPU driver into the operating system image, so you don't end up using the kind of default VESA BIOS. So yeah, very interesting looking project. Looks like early days yet, but it is functional, and they do seem, this kind of seem a bit questionable as to whether this, how well this works on real hardware. So you would think, as someone with a YouTube channel, it would be my duty to demo this to the world. So perhaps that's an idea for a potential project. But if nothing else, of course, other than the kind of the novelty and the fun aspect of this, it is potentially very useful for people wanting to run legacy DOS applications. They make certain assumptions about things being mapped a certain way in memory, and of course, those things being static in memory, not being kind of moved around and stuff as would happen in a modern operating system. So, the fact that this kind of pre-configures all of that and sets all of that environment and then boots kind of a proper legacy DOS environment, seems like about the best way to run this older DOS software on these modern systems. So, potentially very useful as well, which is always nice to say. Don't get me wrong, I like a novelty project that kind of makes hardware do stuff that it was never intended to do. But it's also nice when there are practical applications for it as well. I'm sure you'll agree. So there we go. Nice little story to start us off. And if you, if you've had a play with this yourself, or perhaps you're even using it for some kind of real world application, I would love to hear down in the comments. So please do let me know. If you've been following my YouTube output for any length of time, you will no doubt be aware that I am a huge fan of Atari. That's right, one of my favourite brands of all time, I must say. And it's a love affair that goes all the way back to the late 1980s. So it would have been 1988, 1989-ish. And my older cousin, who I very much looked up to and thought was the coolest guy in the world, he got a 2600 Junior console for Christmas. And I remember being around my uncle's house and playing on that console all day with him. He got 2 games, which were Frogger and, of course, Keystone Capers, which is perhaps a slightly less well-known game, but an awesome one nonetheless by Activision. Well worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. And I remember, when we left after that particular Christmas, begging my parents, I want an Atari more than anything else in the world, The whole being able to plug it into the TV and actually control what was happening on the TV, a massive revelation to me, as you might imagine, as a kid. I'd never seen anything like it, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And yeah, before too long, they did actually capitulate to my childish demands, and they bought me an Atari STE. My dad was kind of against games, and he wanted a proper computer that I could do homework and stuff on. So that's why we got the Atari STE. And I must say, all credit to them. Of course, it set me up on this path that I've taken in life, working as a professional software developer and doing, all of this. And of course, the love for Atari. And, I'm sat here looking at this colourful array of games that I have on the shelf next to me here. I've got my 2600 collection, the 7800 stuff, the 5200 console. I've got the Lego 2600 there. You can't see any of this, but I'm still going to reel off a list. But Jaguar and Lynx stuff. I've got, some Atari prototypes and stuff that I have covered on the channel. Very much, a huge amount of love for the company, at least as it used to stand back in the day. And I think it's fair to say that modern day Atari have of course, there's no real connection to those olden days, but that was always the case with Atari. It changed ownership a few times over the years and reinvented itself. And this latest iteration obviously started off as Infogrames, a French game publisher. And I think it's fair to say got off to a bit of a false start with all the crypto nonsense that they were getting involved with. But I must say, and as you can probably imagine, you probably guessed from some of my recent coverage, I'm actually quite liking what they're doing just lately, and I think they're doing a lot of really cool stuff. I mean, the 2600 Plus and the 7800 Plus consoles, which I have covered on the channel, mini consoles, but they play the original cartridges, and that's quite in fact, I think it is a unique thing in the world of these mini consoles. Didn't follow the route of loading up a load of ROMs onto an SD card or whatever. And I think they have to be commended for that. That's something that I've always thought was really cool and quite unique. Of course, you can't have varying degrees of uniqueness. Something's either unique or it isn't. I should point that out. Anyway, so there we go. Modern day Atari. I am officially a fan after some initial trepidation. So it's nice to see that as a company, they're going from strength to strength, and their latest financial results are out, and they have been reported over on Time Extension, along with some news about some new consoles that are in the pipeline as well. So the headline here, Atari, which just had its best year in over a decade, says new consoles are on the way. New hardware projects will expand the Atari Plus platform, which of course the 2600 Plus and the 7800 Plus are a part of. They both run the same cartridges, the same games. They're essentially the same hardware internally. So there you go. It's just down to whichever one you prefer the look of. So the story here reads, Atari has just had its best financial results in over a decade, it has revealed. The company made the announcement in its preliminary financial year 2025 revenues and business update, and claims that for the fiscal year ended March the 31st, 2025, revenues are expected to reach approximately $36 million, of which $29 million comes from games. And that's a 60% growth compared to the previous year. Atari adds that this solid performance marks the second consecutive year of high growth, bringing Atari's revenues to their highest level in over a decade, and cites the successful execution of the strategic refocus initiated in 2022 under new leadership as the reason for the positive results, which I think is kind of around the time they decided to kick out all the crypto bro rubbish. So I'm no good at reading all this kind of official corporate financial language. That's not really the world that I come from, but I'm going to give it a go, and I'm probably going to trip over my words a bit here, so I do apologise. Atari's retro-focused growth strategy has repositioned Atari with a focus on its principal gaming strategy and targeted market segments where Atari can be a category leader. Over the past 3 years, Atari has revamped its game portfolio, restructured its hardware operations around partnerships and licensing, and deepened its expertise and publishing footprint through the successful acquisitions of Digital Eclipse and Night Dive Studios. Additionally, Atari has also strengthened the company's ability to acquire rights and develop content for some of the world's most well-known IPs. Well done, Reese. Yeah, so of course they acquired Night Dive and Digital Eclipse in the past few years, which I think were really excellent acquisitions. I think they bought Moby Games as well, kind of a prestigious website in the world of gaming. And so far, it looks like they've not actually managed to ruin any of those, which is quite nice to see. And they also acquired all of the active rights to all of the Activision games, I seem to remember reporting at one point as well. So some quite wise business moves, I must say, from Atari. The story goes on to report that 2025 saw Atari release titles such as Yars Rising, Breakout Beyond, Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 and Roller Coaster Tycoon Classic, while Digital Eclipse and Night Dive Studios, two companies recently acquired by Atari, launched the likes of Tetris Forever, Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, Volgar the Viking 2, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind, PO'd, Killing Time, and The Thing Remastered. Atari also launched the Infogrames label and released the Atari 7800 Plus console, and has worked with third parties to license products based on Atari IP, including some cool stuff like the Atari whiskey decanter set and beer glass that I'm sat looking at here. And they've actually got some quite cool merch nowadays as well. So for the coming year, Atari intends to continue to execute its retro-focused growth strategy across all its lines of business, continues the statement. In games, the company plans to continue investing in a dynamic pipeline of new releases based on high-quality, recognisable, owned or licensed IP, and leverage the development capabilities of Digital Eclipse and Night Dive. Perhaps the most exciting segment of this report is the news that more Plus consoles are on the way. New hardware projects will expand the Atari Plus platform, says Atari. And the range also includes the 2600 Plus and the Atari 400 Mini. No specific details about those upcoming Plus consoles just yet. Maybe a 5200 Plus, that would be quite cool. Although I'm not quite sure, obviously it has to run the original cartridges. What are the systems? Obviously, the 2600 and the 7800 use the same cartridge connector. So making those compatible, because the 7800 was designed to be backwards compatible originally anyway. But how are they going to add extra platforms like the 8-bit computers and the potentially the 5200? Not quite sure how that's going to work. An Atari Jaguar Mini on the Atari 7800 Plus platform, but how will the cartridges work? I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen. Anyway, I'm just pondering there. So licensing is expected to advance a strong pipeline of opportunities, concludes Atari. In this context, Atari anticipates a continuation of its high-growth trajectory for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2026. So there we go. The story concludes the Atari of 2025 may not be the same one that released the 2600 back in the 1970s, of course. The brand name has changed hands multiple times since then, but it's nonetheless quite encouraging to see it still stands for something in the modern era. And I'm going to agree with that, actually. It's a real shame that they kind of had to tarnish their reputation with all of the kind of early false moves and stuff. But they're starting to earn people's trust back, and I'm quite liking what they're doing just lately. So nice to see Atari going from strength to strength, and even, bringing us all this cool old retro nostalgic stuff that evidently there is a lot of love for, a lot of demand for, but also kind of being a bit kind of forward facing, looking into the future, bringing out that new games, publishing new games and stuff like that. So yeah, it's all good. I think it's all good in the Atari world, and that is reflected in the results as we've just seen. A bit of a shout out now for a very well-known and loved figure in the world of retro gaming, and also a guy that I've met a few times on a few different occasions at some different events, and he tells me he watches my stuff. So if you're out there watching, a big shout out to you, Stoo Cambridge, believe it or not. And one thing I will just say, just before we get into this story, you may have spotted this mug on my desk recently, and I promise this is relevant. This is a This Week in Retro mug, which of course is a big retro podcast in its own right, one of the biggest. And you'll notice on here that we have some pixel art people, some figures. So we've got Duncan, who is the producer of the show. We've got Dave, Scottish Dave, a much loved retro enthusiast. I'm sure you'll probably see him down in the comments. Neil, of course, from RMC, the Retro Collective, and myself. And the reason that I have a couple of these limited edition This Week in Retro mugs is because I covered for Neil for his paternity leave last year. I actually did a stint of co-presenting on This Week in Retro with Dave, which was a very fun time indeed. And this was kind of my prize for that. So I'm very appreciative of that. But how is that related to this story? Well, the pixel art portraits that you see on here were made by Stoo Cambridge, who worked for Sensible Software back in the day and did all of the artwork for Cannon Fodder and the Sensible Soccer games. So, of course, he's done a load of other stuff since, but that's kind of what he's best known for, his work with Sensible Software. And like I say, he's a thoroughly bloody nice chap as well. Has his own website, designdroid.com. I'll link to that as well. But don't want to sing his praises too much. But anyway, this next story is about a project that he is involved with, and this looks really, really cool. So development on this is already well underway. He's working with Tony Warriner, who is another huge name, of course, in the gaming industry, another stalwart, another legend. And they've launched a Kickstarter for their new game, a very much anticipated Kickstarter campaign, I will say, because, of course, they have been demoing this at shows and things quite recently. Thanks to James from Pixel Refresh, by the way, for bringing this to my attention. But anyway, what is this? So this is a game called UrbX Warriors, and it's an original game for the Spectrum Next and the PC. And when they say PC, what they actually mean is PC, Mac, and Linux. So that's always cool to see. Code by Tony Warriner, pixels by Stoo Cambridge. And they have a bit of a video on here, as you might expect, on the Kickstarter page. I won't play this entire video, but there's quite a cool, some cool little cutscenes and things of Stoo doing some UrbX himself, some urban exploration, and going into some abandoned buildings and things and finding some UrbX Warriors stuff in there. How mysterious. I bet this probably took him back to his cannon fodder days as well, doing the whole, remember the intro video to that when they're all dressed up as soldiers? Perhaps in another life, Stoo, you could have had a life, a career in acting. But anyway, this campaign is doing marvellously well already. I will say £17,308 raised of their very modest £6,000 goal, I will say, and that's with 30 days left to go as well. And as I say, development on this is already well underway, so we know we're going to get something at the end of it. It's coming from two very kind of trustworthy and respectful names, so that's why I'm quite happy to give them a bit of promotion here. So what is the story behind the game? Well, the game is about two urban explorers, of course, UrbX, going into abandoned buildings and stuff and exploring. And of course, Tony Warriner, I will just say here, they've credited him with his work on Beneath a Steel Sky and Broken Sword, which are probably two games that you will have heard of. And of course, he's, like I say, he's a veteran of the gaming industry anyway. He's worked on all sorts of very high-profile, cool stuff over the years. Let's just read what it says on the page. We have drawn on all our industry experience to produce this, our most challenging project to date. This is an arcade adventure game that pushes the Spectrum Next advanced hardware to the limit, paired with just one more go arcade gameplay to captivate players. So, urban explorers Alejandro and Ramona begin to investigate what they believe to be an as yet undiscovered underground temple complex near the foothills around Lake Titicaca. I hope that doesn't get me demonetized. However, to their shock, they quickly discover that they are not alone and find themselves dragged down into the temple's subsurface network of tunnels. Our intrepid explorers soon come to the chilling realization that their inquisitive footsteps are not roaming through just an ancient temple. No, their very presence has awakened something dark, something that has laid dormant for millennia. This is not just a temple, it is a city, a buried, lost subterranean city of the dead. Oh, that was good. Can they evade demons, zombies, and robber gangs, solving the temple's traps and puzzles to become the first to ever escape with their lives? It's down to you. So we've got some nice animated GIF things here, some little explainers as to the gameplay and how it works. So you pick up a crowbar and smash things like zombies and walls too. Smashing is good. Can't say I disagree, but shooting things is much better and satisfying. Keep your strength up by eating food if it's not gone off. Collect keys, open treasure chests, grab treasure, and keep an eye out for bottles of magic. Most of them are good. Guess there's some bad ones. Interesting, intriguing. Remember, you are not alone. Beware of everything. And look at these screenshots. I mean, the character select screen. This is some of Stoo's finest work, I think. It looks absolutely fantastic. Very, very kind of nostalgic, very reminiscent of those old arcade games and stuff. And then we've got some screenshots of the actual gameplay itself. So very kind of Gauntlet vibes, I think it's fair to say, which is certainly no bad thing. Absolutely brilliant, classic game. And so we can meet the characters here, Ramona and Alejandro. I won't go into the details of this, but they do have backstories and stuff, which is really cool. And then there's a bit of a focus on this secret artifact, which I mentioned because this ties into some of the reward tiers that they've come up with. And they've evidently put a lot of thought into these tiers. So I want to talk a little bit about this as well. I promise you they're not paying me for this. I'm just very enthusiastic about this project and about pretty much everything that Stoo does because it's a bloody lovely chap. Anyway, this is like a physical thing. It's a pewter thing, apparently, which comes with a code that is apparently tied into some kind of in-game content and some future project that they have planned as well. So that's quite interesting. It doesn't actually say what it is, but they've got the standard reward tiers that you might expect. So we've got a £15 digital edition, and you can choose between the Spectrum Next edition or the PC, Mac and Linux edition. There's also a standard edition which comes in a DVD case. Of course, the game itself isn't on DVD because nobody has a DVD drive nowadays. It comes on SD card, but it is a nice physical box with a proper printed inlay and stuff. So that's cool. You also get the digital download with that. There's a big box edition, which I think looks absolutely awesome. They've designed a custom box for this. You also get the secret artifact with this one, whatever that may be. And 50 quid for that one. We've got 95 quid. You get a load of extra stuff. So you get a t-shirt, some stickers, coasters, a mouse mat, plus all the stuff that I mentioned before. 275, and how cool is this? A custom Immortal joystick. So I have met Mr. Amiga for Mortals, Mr. Immortal Joysticks. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. But has a very impressive beard. I've met him at a few events. And I also backed his Kickstarter as well, I will say. I actually have an Immortal joystick here behind me. So I can certainly vouch for the quality of that one. But yeah, he's done some custom editions for this game. So you can choose between the Ramona edition or the Alejandro edition. And I really like what he's done with the buttons here, I must say, and kind of made them the eyes of the zombie. I think that's a really cool little design touch there. Very creative indeed. So you can have the pink one or the blue one. Oh, why not go for both? There's an £800 edition which gets you a ticket to an event that they're actually organising, which ties in with this game, which sounds really cool. Of course, no specific details of that yet, but you get all the stuff above, and you get the event ticket, and you get your pixel portrait featured in the game itself, a producer credit. And then there's a 1,500 quid UrbX Master Edition, which comes with all of that. You get a VIP ticket to the event, and you get to design your own level in the game, and get to be an actual character in the game, a custom chat head in the game for 1,500 quid. I mean, they've certainly put a whole lot of thought into this. So that's really cool to see. So much detail on this page, and I can't go through and read it all out to you here. But it's really cool to see this. Bit of background information about the team, Tony Warriner and Stoo Cambridge. Like I say, industry veterans, legends in their own right. A bit of behind-the-scenes information about how they're actually producing this thing, both on the code side and the graphics side. And also a bit about how they actually demoed the game at Crash Live 2024, which unfortunately I wasn't able to attend. Of course, they are pushing this as a Spectrum Next game, but as mentioned, it is available on PC, Mac and Linux as well, or it will be. And they've also mentioned here that Richard Faulkner is doing the audio, so the music and the sound effects. Certainly a very accomplished musician and, sound guy in his own right, and Chris Wilkins is handling the publishing side of this. So he is the CEO of Fusion Retro Games, who I'm sure you've heard of, and also the guy behind Zap, Crash and Fusion. Wow, that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? So guaranteed free from generative AI, DLC, in-app purchases, etc. Old school pixel art and handcrafted Z80 code, awesome sound effects, and a mystifying musical score. And there is a demo available on Windows, Mac, and Next if you want to go and give it a play before you back the project. So I would say that this looks very low risk, very, very well thought out campaign with lots of very cool rewards. And I want to wish them the greatest of success. As I say, they have massively smashed their target already. And I know this is going to be a success, but certainly one that I'm going to be backing once I've finished recording today. And I just wanted to bring it up on your radar as well. So very, very cool. UrbX, what's it called? UrbX Warriors. New Kickstarter. And the link will be down in the description along with all the other stories that I mentioned in this ramble, as always. And now for the segment of this week's ramble, which I'm going to affectionately refer to as Technic Corner. That's right, Technic, who has submitted all sorts of interesting stories over the past few weeks, has apparently gone drunk with power this week and submitted not one, not two, but three very interesting things which I couldn't ignore and that I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to lump them all together. Well done, you've got your own segment now. Call that a glow up. But anyway, let's dive straight into this because there's some quite interesting reading here. The very first one here is on xdadevelopers.com, and this is a story all about the Sega Master System, one of my favourite consoles of all time, and how it is still officially manufactured in Brazil by a company called Tectoy, which I was aware of. I'm very kind of familiar with their work, one that does keep coming up on my radar. But yeah, 40 years ago, they licensed the Master System from Sega, and they are still officially manufacturing them under license. Not the design that you might be familiar with. In fact, the design of the console has kind of changed and evolved a bit over the past 40 years in Brazil, and this article covers them in great detail and all of the history behind that partnership, and how it's still going strong today, which is really cool, and how these 8-bit consoles are still big sellers and still very much considered to be current in this market in Brazil. Very unique and interesting market over there. So it's not a clone or a bootleg, but it's also not the original hardware either. In Brazil, the Sega Master System lives on as a licensed ROM-on-a-chip console. It's basically like a self-contained emulator, still manufactured and stocked on retail shelves, preloaded with 132 classic games, 40 years after its original release, and 36 years since it made its way to Brazil. The 8-bit system that vanished from shelves elsewhere is alive and well. Now, I'm not going to go through and read all of this, because you should go and read it yourself. It's a fantastic article. But as mentioned, it does cover these various different iterations of the Master System in Brazil and the history of them, the history of the company and their fascinating partnership, how these things are packaged, really interesting looking consoles and packaging, interesting take on the Master System. And looks like they've pretty much left to their own devices to kind of design these things to meet their local market. And there's also a bit of stuff in here about Tectoy's other work, some stuff with a Nintendo connection, and even this wonderful thing, the Phantom system, which is actually an NES clone. But if you're watching this on YouTube, you may find this quite familiar because it's an Atari, essentially, an Atari 7800 style case. But it's a Famiclone, so that's quite interesting, called the Phantom. I'm going to have to see if I can get my hands on one of those and perhaps do a video on it. But anyway, fascinating article all about Tectoy and their partnership with Brazil and how the Master System is still going strong in that market. So that's very cool to see. The next story is all about Half-Life 2, one of my favourite games of all time. Of course, Half-Life, one of my favourite series of all time. And it's increasingly looking like we might be getting a new instalment in the very near future. But that's not what this story is about. No, so this is on PCGamesN.com, and this is about a legendary mod for Half-Life 2, which is coming to Steam soon. It's been around for quite a while, but it is getting an official release on Steam. And this mod allows you to play through Half-Life 2 as a co-op game using the characters from Team Fortress 2. So it's like a squad shooter type game. It's called Lambda Fortress, not a project I was familiar with at all. It's created by Coaxian, apparently, a hobbyist studio of some 30 developers and modders. The power of Lambda Fortress is twofold. First, it lets you play Half-Life 2 as a co-op game, secondly, you get to play as the Team Fortress 2 characters, as mentioned, with their own unique weapons and powers and abilities. So that looks like a very cool project, and it will be, of course, its release on Steam will make it, it legitimizes it and, of course, makes it a lot more easily available for people. So that's always a good thing to see. And the third story this week from Technic, sadly, is not quite such a positive one. So I just wanted to end on this one. This is to do with the Free Play Arcade down in Dorset. It's in Portland in Dorset. And this was an arcade which sadly has had to shut its doors after only 6 months, just because the owner is has kind of really suffered with the having to run this arcade, which of course is really sad to see. So this has been reported in the Dorset Echo, and the owner, Mike Saxton, has decided to shutter the arcade after just 6 months of business. So it's been a massive wait for 6 months. I've been really drained and exhausted by the experience and have been mentally battered, Saxton said on Facebook. Unfortunately, seems like it's not working. There's no money coming in, and of course, cost of living, cost of running a business is ever ever increasing in this day and age, certainly here in the UK. And yeah, the business needs to make £500 per day each weekend to reach break-even point, and it's actually currently making less than half of that. So yeah, it's been hemorrhaging money on the weekends and just about breaking even in the holidays. Saxton adds that opening for more days was simply not possible. We tried weekdays, and most days the takings were zero. The odd day made 30 to 40 to £50. Everyone is at work or at school, and even after school and work, people are busy with their weekly lives. So it says here they have around 27 arcade cabinets. Got some good games here: Sega Rally 2, House of the Dead, Time Crisis, and Super Pac-Man. And they charge a flat fee for entry, and all of the games are free to play, hence the name Free Play Games. So, yeah, really sad story out of Portland in Dorset. But they are open until May the 31st, which is tomorrow, as at the time of recording and the time that this will be released. So if you are in the Portland area, on the 31st of May, perhaps go and pop in and check this out, because it will be your last ever opportunity. So unfortunate to see, and of course my condolences to Mike Saxton, but well done for giving it a go and for sticking it out for 6 months, and hopefully whatever you go on to do next will be a bit more fruitful. So there you go. Thank you to Technic for those 3 stories. Good stuff. And that's, my dear Ramblers, brings us around quite neatly to my regular Video of the Week feature, wherein I feature a video that I've seen here on the YouTubes in the past week that has entertained or enlightened or educated or otherwise improved my life in some small way. Quite often they are retro and vintage computing and technology related, but quite often they're not. And as is increasingly becoming the case just lately, this week I have more than one video for you, but I have a very good reason for that. So let's dive straight in with this first one. And this is a video from LGR. That's right, small channel that you may have come across, possibly. No, of course, he's got 1.77 million subscribers. Bloody lovely chap, Clint. He's been doing this since the dawn of YouTube itself and still putting out excellent, very high quality videos. Bloody love the guy. You've probably come across this video already, and that's the reason why I have 2 here, because the second one is from a smaller channel. But first, we'll take a look at this. This is the history of those magic eye images, if you remember those kind of patterns of dots and things where you stare into the picture and like a 3D image kind of reveals itself. I had a couple on my bedroom wall as a kid. He does talk about how huge these were in the 90s in America. And yeah, just wanted to confirm that they were absolutely massive here in the UK as well. We saw them absolutely everywhere. I think I even had the book that he features in the video as well. And like I say, I certainly had a couple of the posters. And one thing I will say is that I've always found these very, very... See, I'm finding myself doing this here, just watching this. I've always found these very easy to see. I'm not sure if it's because I had those posters as a kid and I used to spend a lot of time looking at them. But he shows loads of examples here, and it's really cool to kind of see them pop out almost immediately, and that I haven't lost that crucial life skill over the years. But yeah, joking aside, I had no idea that the technology behind these images goes all the way back to the 1970s. So it was fascinating to hear the story of how those algorithms were developed. And also, as you might expect from Clint, see a bit of DOS software in action to actually generate these. It's got over 290,000 views, which is big even by his standards. And that's perhaps unsurprising because it is, like I say, such a fascinating subject. But as mentioned, you've probably... Oh, one more thing that I just wanted to mention as well. A really cool fact that I got from this video that was really unexpected. You remember that elf bowling game, flash game, that was doing the rounds back in the 90s? People used to like email it to each other and stuff. It was like a Christmas-themed game with like Christmas elves, and they were like the pins in a bowling alley, and you had to knock them over with a bowling ball. Well, that game was actually developed by one of the people who developed the algorithm to generate these images. So yeah. Weird fact, weird pub quiz fact. Not quite sure what kind of pub quizzes people are attending, but you would think that would be one of the questions if if they knew what they were doing. But anyway, of course, you've probably seen this video. It's a huge channel. It's got a ridiculous amount of views on it already. So if you're looking for a bit more value for money from your video of the week from Reese Rambles, I'm going to recommend something from a much smaller channel as well. And this guy is, I will say, he is a real-life friend of mine. I say friend, he's more of a kind of a nemesis and a constant thorn in my side, but this is Rob Smith. maker of all sorts of weird and wonderful contraptions. And I actually had a table next to him at the Kickstarter Amiga show last year, and he'd built a floppy disk cleaning station, which was modelled after a car wash, and you put the disk in it and it kind of goes through all the different stages. And it plays this horrific disco music on repeat, which is brilliant, bloody brilliant the first few times you see it. After 2 full days, stood on your feet, stood next to this thing, running repeatedly. I was about ready to beat him to death with it. But no, still bloody love the guy, and he's a bloody lovely chap, and he's done a lot for the Amiga community as well. All sorts of floppy disk imaging related stuff and software and cool projects like that as well. So his channel's worth checking out for those. But this is documenting his latest project, his latest silly gizmo, which of course he's going to be taking to all the big shows and things this year. And it's a whack-a-mole game that launches floppy disks, and you basically have to catch them and put them back in the floppy drives. It's got like 5 floppy drives in the top, and you have to catch these flying disks and shove them all back in as quickly as possible. I haven't seen this thing in action yet. I haven't actually seen it in real life, although I did get a bit of a sneak preview of the kind of the development of this before he kind of went public with it. But as you might expect from Rob, 3D printing, coding, Arduino stuff, hardware stuff, electronics. It's the full shebang, and absolutely fascinating video documenting how he put this together as usual from his channel. If you are not subscribed to Rob Smith Dev, please do. If this is your bag, and I should hope that it is, please do go check out this video and go and give him a little subscribe as well. Maybe comment on the video, let him know that I sent you. Because he'll very much appreciate that. But it's a really cool project. I am actually genuinely looking forward to having to play with this in real life at some point. But I find all of this fascinating. He's so much smarter than me. I'll be the first to say that. With the 3D modelling, the 3D printing, the coding, the electronics. He's a Renaissance man, isn't he? In every sense of the word. Hopefully, if I'm nice enough to him, he won't torture me again in future. So they're my videos of the week, and they will be linked down in the usual places, as you might expect, along with all of the other stories covered in this week's Ramble. And finally, just a bit of a channel update for you. Of course, I have released a video today, so we'll talk a little bit about how that's doing, related to this item that you've probably been sat looking at next to me on the desk for the duration of this Ramble, this MacBook that you see here. And of course, at the beginning of this Ramble, I also mentioned that I would talk about some of the work I've been doing on the studio. So what have I been up to in the studio over the past couple of weeks? Well, I have a couple of videos here, and hopefully this kind of shows what I've been up to. So we have this glass partition between this, which is essentially the meeting room attached to an office, and the office next door. And that office basically wasn't being used when I kind of first took on this studio. And I have found that it is increasingly being used during the day when I'm in here recording. And sound leakage between the two different parts was becoming a bit of a concern. So I decided to put some soundproofing material up between the two different halves. So over the top of this glass partition, I have built a bit of a wooden frame, and I have attached a material called mass-loaded vinyl. So this is a special type of vinyl that's 5mm thick, and it's basically a professional soundproofing material that's used in recording studios and in construction and stuff like that. Huge pain. These sheets, they're like 2 meters by 1.2 meters, and they weigh 10 kilos, which are an absolute pain to manhandle into position, as you might imagine, particularly as I was working behind the shelves. I only had the room to move the shelves forward ever so slightly and kind of squeeze in behind them. Very pleased to report that it has made quite a big difference. I can still hear a little bit of noise, but it's just kind of a bit of a muffled noise now, rather than kind of very clearly being able to hear people speak. So it's not disrupting my recording anymore, which is great. Of course, will make a big difference to the amount of stuff that I can get recorded here. And if we just, we'll just stop this one and click through to the next one, you can see this kind of under construction. So I had the wooden cladding across that wall anyway, or at least across part of that wall, because this was my original studio backdrop. Thank you, Google Photos, for playing this in absolutely potato quality. But anyway, so what I did was I built that frame, I stapled the stuff to it, and I have clad back over the top with wood to block the sound. Of course, there is a door as part of this wall, and I have designed this in such a way that if I need to open up that doorway, I can. It's just a case of cutting it through in a particular place. So the final finished result, I've just taken this photo now, looks like this. I'll go and pause this so it's not playing in the background. There we go. Looks like this. This is the photo, and yeah, it's basically looking pretty much exactly the same as it always has, but it is a lot more soundproof now. So yeah, it doesn't look like I've been doing anything at all for the past couple of weeks, but I promise you, it is a big improvement. And there are still some piles of detritus lying around. But anyway, that's what I have been up to, and of course that wasn't a particularly cheap endeavour. The mass-loaded vinyl itself was around £200, and then there was the cost of all of the wood and all of the other bits and bobs that I needed to do that. So thank you to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. Oh, my YouTube channel members as well for supporting that. It makes it easier to justify these investments and these decisions. And of course, as mentioned, I have also released a video today. So this is to do with a project called FideOS, which is what they've essentially done is they've taken Chrome OS. If you know the Chromebooks, Google's Chrome OS, it's kind of a cloud-based operating system, very lightweight. And what they've done is they've taken Chromium OS, which is kind of the underlying open source version of that, and they have made their own kind of distribution of it, their own customized version of it, which removes the requirement to have to log into a Google account to be able to use it, and also adds some supposedly interesting functionality, like the ability to run Android applications on non-Chromebook devices, and allegedly install Linux desktop applications, although as you'll see in the video, I did struggle with that. I did run into some issues with that. But yeah, it's quite an interesting look into the story behind that operating system and how it came about. Let's show some more interesting footage. There we go. The story behind FideOS and how it came about and how it kind of relates to Chrome and Chromium OS and what they're kind of trying to achieve. And then genuine kind of first impressions and hands-on look at it and see how it all works and try to work out who this is for and how it might be potentially useful to someone, maybe. So that's the latest video over on my main channel, Control-Alt-Reese. And it's doing all right. It's a little bit below average, but quite a specialist subject, and it's also a very long video. It's 40 minutes long, so I can imagine a lot of people aren't jumping on it immediately. But it's got 1,400 views in its first 4 hours or so, 4.5 hours. Gained me 2 new subscribers. It's very early days yet, so we'll have to see how this one goes. But if nothing else, quite an interesting journey, I must say, learning all about this OS that I knew nothing about. I mean, I haven't even used Chrome OS until I started researching for this video and putting it together, so it has been quite the journey. But anyway, that's all I have for you for this week's Ramble, so thank you ever so much for joining me once more. Please do go and check out all of the links to this week's stories down in the description, or indeed in the show notes if you are listening to this on a podcast platform such as Spotify or one of the many others out there. But that's all I have for you, as mentioned, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you usual time and place, 2 minutes to midnight next Friday, for next week's Ramble. That's it. Bye.